welcome to Financial Executives International Corporate Financial Reporting Insights Conference. A few housekeeping notes. If you're seeking CPE credit for the sessions you attend during the conference, please refer to the CPE credit requirements document housed in the resource list window on your screen and ensure you meet the stated minimum requirements. Attendance checks will appear throughout each session as a pop-up screen on your window, along with an audio cue. Now it's FEI's pleasure to introduce Alex Troncale, Senior Manager of Business Development at Financial Executives International. Alex?
Well, thank you, Kelly, and good morning. My name is Alex Troncale, and I would like to welcome you to our session in the forward-looking world of finance and accounting, leading yourself and others, sponsored by Siegfried. We would like to thank Siegfried for their support and for their commitment to the professional development of our members and attendees. Finance departments of the future must achieve even higher levels of effectiveness while serving as stewards of their own spend. Our panel will discuss how financial departments can embrace an entrepreneurial future that delivers results above the impacts of cost. Moderating the discussion is Peter Mazzone, Managing Director at the Siegfried Group, and our panelists include Sarah Broadwick, Founder, CFO, and COO with FEAT and CFO at Known, Tom Covell, CPA, National Business Service People Leader at PwC, and Mark Fitzpatrick, Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer at Madison Square Garden Entertainment. It is my pleasure to welcome our speakers.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining today's session on leadership. We have an exciting panel, and I will further introduce them in just a minute. But I just wanted to thank FEI and just mention over the last few weeks, there have been some really compelling sessions. Nelson Mandela's grandson, for those of you who haven't seen it, was on one of the sessions last week with Steve Rivera. And wow, I thought all the sessions on diversity and inclusion, and Steve, just your candor, humility, authenticity, I think it helps bring out the best in people. So we're looking forward to living up to your high bar. I had a number of takeaways and insights from those sessions, and I really enjoyed the concept of everyone wants to be invited to the dance, but then everybody wants to be asked to dance. And then also, can we select the music, right? So these are certain concepts for somebody that's out there, and that was tied to, does it always have to be golf? Is it always football conversation on Mondays, right? So trivia, are you doing trivia nights with your teams, and does somebody feel excluded because it's solely on American pop culture? And for someone that has hosted multiple trivia nights over the last 18 months with COVID, it just gave me some real points to think about. So just wanted to share that. If this was in person, we would have caught up after the session. Just some housekeeping. So sessions are available for replay for 90 days and audience participation. So we're not in person, as I mentioned, everyone knows, but the Q&A feature is down at the bottom, and let's all make this an engaging session. Encourage you to ask questions. We have exciting panelists, so I hope you will participate. And throughout the session, I'll be monitoring. We have a number of questions we'll get through, and we'll look to answer questions in the final 10 to 15 minutes. So without further ado, let me introduce my esteemed panel. We have Sarah Broderick. Sarah is a CPA and is now the founder and CEO of The Feet. The Feet offers products and services to the market of experienced professionals that have left the workforce. In April 2021, she also became the partner and CFO at Known, a data science-based marketing company. Sarah began her career at Deloitte and has held senior leadership positions at NBC Universal, Comcast, GE, Endeavor, and Vice Media. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you.
We have Mark Fitzpatrick. Mark serves as Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of Madison Square Garden Entertainment. Prior to MSG, Mark previously held senior leadership positions at WeWork, Time Warner, and AOL. Glad to have you with us, Mark. Last but not least, we have Tom Covell. Tom is also a CPA, Managing Director, and the National Business Services People Leader at PwC. In his current role, Tom has responsibility for the leadership and implementation of PwC's people strategy for over 8,000 partners and staff within the business services functions, as well as being the COO for the National People Leadership Team. His deep knowledge of human capital strategy and operations draws upon his more than 30 years of experience at PwC. Welcome, Tom. So let's jump into this. Leadership in the forward-looking world of finance and accounting, leading yourself and others. I mean, this can go a multitude of directions, and I'm super excited to see where we take this. You know, for Siegfried and everything we teach, you know, I always think of the analogy, well, leadership starts with yourself, but I think of the analogy of you put the mask, you know, on the plane, on yourself first before you help others. And great leaders are great leaders of themselves, and it's contagious. It spreads across their teams. It's something we continue to work on throughout our careers and in our personal lives. You know, you can't take a 2-day leadership training tied to a promotion and, you know, get a certificate. You're a great leader. Even Warren Buffett and Elon Musk, that things they're still working on and striving for. It takes work, it takes discipline, consistency, humility, and a desire to continuously improve. How do we bring these leadership character ethic traits and build them in ourselves and cultivate the mindset across our stakeholders? So my first question is, what is your reaction to that? How do you do you agree that leadership begins with yourself first? You want to start with Mark?
Mark, you might be on mute.
Sounds like Mark might be having some technical challenges. Would anyone else like to jump in while Mark is getting set?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start, Peter. I mean, I think that, you know, if there's nothing that this last year and a half has taught all of us, is that I think that, you know, we've all looked inward a bit more to figure out what it is that in how we lead, and we've all had to lead differently. And so I think that we were all forced to look at our own families differently. We were all forced to look at our careers and what was important to us. And I think by doing that, I think it forced a lot of people to create empathy that maybe, you know, we didn't have before around, you know, what is it that's also personally affecting other people. And so I think that, you know, we naturally had to kind of take care of ourselves, take care of people around us. And I think ultimately we're going to see that it's, you know, it's created more empathetic leadership. Because I think we've got a little bit more understanding around the things that are happening to the folks that work for us that maybe we just didn't see inside the workforce. So I do think that this period of time has really highlighted that, if nothing else.
Hey, it's Mark. Am I back on? Sorry, I think I had a technical problem.
You are back on. Thank you,
Sorry
Sarah.
about that. So thanks, Sarah, for jumping in and kind of filling in. But super excited about today's session. I had a great prep with Tom, Sarah, Pete, and I know they're really excited to exchange ideas. So let me just say, first of all, for me, the key to being relevant and compelling is to be authentic, transparent, and really value your employees as individuals. So let me just dig a little deeper on authenticity. You know, I think a lot of people enter rooms and they want to be the smartest person. They need to just think about themselves. They want to make sure that they're kind of distinguishing themselves. And I think the key for me is always to recognize I'm not the smartest person in the room, and that there's a lot for me to learn from everybody else in the room. You know, everyone makes mistakes. Everyone needs to ask for help. And I think that's kind of being authentic. You got to be somebody who can be someone can come to and feel comfortable in sharing their kind of concerns and their needs. You know, and then look, I hate to say this, but it's okay not to be liked by everybody. You need to, your job's not about making friends. It's about getting the work done. So you got to be authentic. And that means sometimes you're not going to appeal to everyone. I think the second thing is you really need to be transparent. And if we're going to really develop the next generation of leaders, they need to understand what's required to be a leader. And then what is the skills and, you know, how the business works. And I think sometimes, you know, it's easy for me to just have everyone do their jobs and kind of get their tasks done and not really see the big picture. I think it's very important for people to see the big picture, you know, see not just you know, how we make money, but how their kind of role fits into the organization. my goal in my career is to prepare future leaders, and I'm comfortable. My real goal is that I want everyone to take my job at the end of the day. And so I'm not going to be threatened if people do a better job than me, if they're smarter than me, if they have relationships with other executives in the organization. I want to foster that. I want them not to realize that I don't want to be a clog in the wheel. And I think what's really happened over the last 18 months, has probably been happening for years, is you need to really appreciate everyone as individuals. Everyone is different. They respond to different things. Some respond to the proverbial carrot, some respond to the proverbial stick. But you really need to kind of figure out what's most effective for each person. And it could be a combination, and you need to really work with them. And I think we've lost that a little bit in this kind of Zoom world. Like you don't have that personal connection. And so I think that's why it's very important for people to kind of have a personal connection, really adapt to people, and really kind of treat people as individuals. So I don't know if anyone has anything to add to that.
Well, I'll just jump in quickly. I mean, you touched upon a lot of themes there that I fully agree with. I mean, the concept of not being liked by everybody, and I think at some point in your career, the first decade of your career, you're focused on being well liked. I'll do anything anyone wants, right? But I think as you move onward, in the latter half of your career, it becomes more about being well respected. So I always like the concept of being well respected versus well liked, and there's a difference. You touched upon humility. Building an understanding, right? Yeah, you have one role within this organization, but what are the goals? What are the priorities? And you pick a star, any star, we're all working towards that same goal. And then just in terms of, you sparked a saying that I heard recently: good mentors hope you'll move on one day. Great mentors know you will, right? And if you're irreplaceable, you're not promotable, right? So building the next generation behind you. So I thought those were really great points. Anyone else? So let's move on to our next question. So when it comes to character ethic, great leaders typically have a foundation in integrity, accountability, empathy, humility, which we discussed, resilience, vision, and positivity. How do we hire for and cultivate these traits? Tom, you want to take this one? I feel like this is well suited for you and your background.
Sure, Peter. Thanks, and it's my pleasure to be here today with Sarah and Mark and you, Peter, and the rest of the audience. And Sarah and Mark have already touched on some of this, but related to the question how we build these attributes of leadership into our organization at PwC, I think simply stated, we live it every day. But you might say, well, but how do you really concentrate a focus around those leadership attributes? So I think there are really two ways that we achieve that at PwC. First and foremost, we're a purpose-led and values-driven organization and focused around our mission and ultimately to build trust and solve complex problems. But this is not corporate jargon. Ultimately, when it comes down to our purpose and our values, we live this every day. And we expect people to live the values, demonstrate the values, and ultimately be evaluated and assessed around how they deliver those values and how they come to work and show up every day working with their teams, either in their function or even cross-functionally or across the segments. Another way that we're able to really build these attributes into our organization is through the Pwc Professional, which is our capability model. And one of those capabilities is focused around leadership, and under leading self, leading others are two of the sub-attributes, if you will, and certainly we focus on these attributes in our whole leadership dimension. So it's critically important, and ultimately that Pwc Professional also embodies, our Pwc behaviors, which also include integrity, caring, amongst others. So it's something that we live every day. Ultimately, as we look to recruit talent, we take the Pwc Professional and ultimately recruit around those dimensions for people that have demonstrated those capabilities in the past and have a foundation that we can work with in order to help them grow and lead into the future.
Thanks, Tom. Do you feel some of these, just given today's environment, some of these attributes, integrity, accountability, empathy, humility, resilience, are some more important than others?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that all the attributes are important for great leaders. I certainly think over the last 18 months, as Sarah had stated, some of these have become more prevalent and important than others. Some of them we may have taken for granted as we were cruising along in what I'll call the normal world. But certainly what Sarah and Mark have indicated, transparency, authenticity, I think are really important. But I want to come back to what Sarah said. I think empathy is critically important as we go forward. We are in the day and age of tailoring to the individual. It's really important as leaders for us to understand on an individual by individual basis what makes them tick, what's important to them, how do they find fulfillment, how do they find purpose. Also, what are some of the challenges that they're faced with on a day in and day out basis? And obviously over the last 18 months, that's been more critical than ever before, given some of the challenges, personal and professional challenges our folks have had to deal with. But I ultimately think that empathy is critically important for any leader as you look to the future. I think it's even further emphasized when you bring up the great resignation and the war for talent these days. If you're not demonstrating empathy, you're probably running the risk of losing some of your top talent to other organizations that are out there recruiting it. So when you really take a step back, taking the time to demonstrate that empathy, connecting one-on-one, making sure that you're adjusting your leadership and management style to help those folks grow and develop around the way that they want to. Some folks today don't want to necessarily climb that corporate ladder. Others do. Many want that manager level, after 6 months, a little different than in the past. But certainly understanding where these folks come out on that spectrum are critically important as you look to help these folks grow and develop their careers and as a person.
Thanks, Tom. Anyone else have anything to add?
I would just add very quickly, I think, this is Sarah, Tom made a lot of great points, and I think that, I can't wait to really dig in. PwC has made some really big decisions around remote work and that workforce. And I think a lot of these things play into what does the next generation really require. And I think that, sometimes we conflate leadership with bringing people along the way we were brought up. And I think it's really important that we realize that our job in cultivating leaders for tomorrow is how to lead the next generation of the workforce. And they want something different. And we want something different as leaders. And so it's not necessarily, I think anytime someone says, you need to, and I'll use be in the office because I know it's one that we have, we potentially have lots of different views on, but you need to be in the office to demonstrate leadership for the rest of your team to be there. But I think we have to think of that differently, which is that we may also have people whose lives have changed, and we need to demonstrate leadership by recognizing what our teams need in these moments. And, we, rather than, another example, we need to be in a conference room in order to learn how to negotiate, or we need to be in a conference room and a whiteboard in order to learn how to teach. But this generation of leaders has also communicated differently. And I think that it's our job to not necessarily revert to how we were brought up or what leadership meant to us and how we were taught to be leaders, but rather figure out what we need in the future and how we prepare leaders to lead that generation. And I think that's a real big distinguishment between that will really define, leadership in the next few years is really making a determination of what was it that worked for me versus what's going to work for tomorrow. And I think we've got to be really tuned in on that.
We have to change. We have to adapt. And I think, when we look at what we're looking for in terms of these character ethic traits in the workforce, it's out there, but there's also an element of hiring for potential, right? And what are firms doing to cultivate these character traits, right? Because there's a great article in Harvard Business Review a number of years ago that talks about hiring for potential. And too often we're overly focused on experience and expertise. Well, I want someone that's already done this before. But if you hire the right foundation, right, with these intangibles and the desire to learn, the desire to jump into new things, those attributes are better drivers of if somebody will be successful than I've done this before. Because somebody that chances are has only done one thing and has done it for 10 years, they don't like challenges, right? They don't want to get out of their comfort zone. And so, yeah, on paper, they might have everything you're looking for, but it doesn't always translate into what you really are looking for, right? So, and then in terms of, you tied into very nicely into my next question, which is, and if any of you were part of the prior sessions, there was a really great session with kind of the younger generation and what they're looking for, talented group of individuals on that panel, all 20-somethings. And, the younger generation, along with all of us, honestly, want a career with purpose and meaning, at all stages, not just, the idea of promotions based on time served and busy as a badge. Those mentalities are going away. So how do we approach and cultivate this new culture, as leaders within our organization, versus, this concept of, hey, my life was really tough and I worked 80-hour weeks for the first 10 or 15 years of my career. And, now I get to delegate all the work I don't want to do to you, and that's not working with that. You look at people jumping across different companies, after 1 year, 18 months, hey, I'm not seeing the vision. I'm not seeing the leadership. And these people are talented. And if we can change our leadership style, we can retain them, right? So it's a big change, and it varies, right? There's a wide spectrum of startup organizations and very bureaucratic organizations, and it's not easy. But I'm just curious to hear the panel's thoughts on how do we approach this?
Yeah, Peter, I can jump in here. I think, as I indicated earlier, connecting one-on-one is critically important. Now, obviously, many of the people in our audience lead and manage very, very large organizations and teams. So I think the key element of that is making sure that your teams are highly effective. The team leaders are ultimately connecting with their individuals. You obviously have to break these teams down so that there is that one-on-one connectivity, but then understanding at the individual level what these folks want out of their career, what is purposeful to them, what is fulfilling to them in a career. How can we help as leaders to achieve that, help them achieve their goals and objectives? And I think the day and age of kind of massive solutions or macro solutions, then think that that's going to stick is probably not going to, given where we are from a talent standpoint. And everybody brings a little different look and feel to the equation. They have different skills, different capabilities, and they're really setting the bar higher for us as leaders to meet them where they are and help tailor their career for them. Some will want to fast track. Others may, due to other outside interest and other challenges personally, maybe they want to slow things down. But we have to be able to understand that and ultimately design and work with them, design a career path and work with them in terms of how they want to move forward.
Yeah, I think, Tom, I agree very much. I think one of the things, maybe there's two or three things that are slightly obvious and at the same time just a huge opportunity. I mean, number one, I think that the remote work environment has broken down 200 years of acceleration that probably allows us to accommodate and capture the desires of the next generation in a much different way. And I say that from the standpoint is that it's completely leveled so many operating challenges that we previously had. And when you talk about, heating the seat, Peter, or you talk about time served versus output, how our performance models have to change because everybody has been remote. And that leveling is not about accommodating someone with remote work allowing them to be on a phone call and then hanging up the conference call and the real decision being made in the room, right? We were all forced into a model in which we were all remote. And so therefore it's forcing companies, I think, to relook at performance and output as the primary indicator of performance, as opposed to, face time and time served and time in the office. And so by default, I think the days of sitting in a chair waiting for your boss to leave, start to break down. And I think that's, a very obvious one. But I think that there are a couple other things that I think are really possibly nuanced. But, I think our definition of communities have changed, right? Previously, we had maybe two communities that were allowable. Right? We had our work community, and Tom, again, I think this comes a lot to PwC's decisions probably that you can weigh in on, but we had a work community and we had a family community. And you went for drinks with people at work and you spent time with family. And over the last year and a half, we've developed all these other communities that have filled the void of physically being at work. People have created relationships with neighbors. They've created relationships with kids' parents. You've joined clubs. We've taken on side gigs and interesting things that we never had time for possibly before because people aren't commuting. And so the ability now to allow those to be allowable things, it's not just if you have to go pick up your child, that's an allowable community, allowing someone to be really interested in some entrepreneurial pursuit in parallel to their job or their core job, I think can now be viewed as a positive that's attracting more entrepreneurial employees and breaking down that void between you're either an employee or you're an entrepreneurial person sleeping on the couch somewhere. So just by expanding our definition of communities, I think we're able to attract multidimensional people and hopefully starting to address some of the concerns, Peter, that you just talked about, which is I don't want to sell my soul to a company. I want to bring my whole self. I want to be me, and I want to be able to bring my whole self to work, and that whole self is really valuable. And I think that, maybe the last piece on that is that what that's doing, I think, is it shifts our values in that maybe previously we were really focused internally on how do we make leadership look like our employee base? How do we, do our employees look to our board and look to our leadership to find someone that looks like them? And I really think there's this shift of looking for companies and leaders that share your values and share this willingness to have and the value that we bring as multidimensional people to an organization. And I really think that's a fundamental shift that starts to address that concern of people, including my older daughter, who's like, I don't want to work 12 hours. I don't want to do what you did. And, I think that we've kind of been forced into a model, which I think is a huge positive, that is going to hopefully address some of that because we didn't have a choice,
Sarah, it's Mark. Unbelievable. I think I agree with everything you said. I think to me, the key thing is we need to figure out new KPIs to figure out how people are productive. I had a very short career at a law firm where it was all about billable hours. And then I was an investment banker for many years where it was all about face time. You had to stay for the last time. So we need to figure out how to define what is productivity, what is work. And I think different companies are going to take that different path to figure that out. Obviously the pandemic accelerated kind of this, work from home movement and people working remotely. I do get concerned that we are rushing into this a little bit and that 5 to 10 years from now, we're going to look at this next level of leaders and they're going to miss some of that kind of in-person kind of relationships they're supposed to build. I mean, I know I've had friends who did work remotely for 10 years and they regret it at times because they didn't really develop those relationships. They were not part of those kind of discussions, which are going to invariably happen in the office, and they're invariably going to happen when people are together. And I think the junior people need to develop relationships. I feel for the people who just graduated from college and are working in investment banking, and they're working in their apartment all day and not having that mentorship and that kind of camaraderie, that community that can be developed. So I'm concerned that we just need to think of it as an evolution, and it's kind of gotten accelerated. But some people who are going full time, it gets me nervous that we might regret some of these decisions 5 to 10 years because we haven't developed the next level of leaders.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I think, I think the interesting question, Mark, that comes up with that, right, is does your employer define your physical interaction in space, right? And so, do we move to a spot where we do still as humans and as professionals require professional interaction, but might those be in more mixed environments that aren't necessarily defined by an employer banner? I think that's an interesting, kind of physical concept of the future in terms of where we physically work. And we don't want to be in our pajamas and we don't want young people to be in their pajamas on their couch. And at the same time, do we necessarily need to be given all of the evolution underneath in an office that has our own employer as the banner, right? Is there some mix there that creates that professional interaction in a more dynamic way that represents the future? I think that's an interesting question. And I think that the other piece that I do maybe addresses the other part of your question, Peter, that Mark just touched on too, is we would be, I think, remiss to not acknowledge your point about we all want passionate and we all want, what did you say, influential work, or we want meaningful work. And, I think I've never met somebody who has worked hard and is passionate about what they do who hasn't been successful, right? And at the same time, I have yet to meet somebody who found that in their first job. And so I think that we as leaders also have an obligation to be able to extract the value you're getting out of some things that you're doing in your career that might not necessarily meet all of your criteria, but they're getting you to somewhere you want to go and putting in the work that creates an experience that's going to get you somewhere. I think sometimes we maybe glaze over that in trying to, get someone to achieve their nirvana job in their very first role. And I think, that for sure should not be overlooked,
Yeah, I agree with everything that was said. And it is, the world is changing. And one of the, just thinking about this, I feel like working from home, an individual, to what Mark said, they were disconnected. They worked from home for 10 years. I think working from home before COVID was very different than working from home after COVID, right? When everyone was working from home. Because I feel like there is an element of, we're all in this together, and you still can connect in a very deep way over Zoom. And the other, just in terms of efficiency, like, I don't know how you guys feel, but I am insanely effective at home in front of my 2 27-inch monitors, where I go into the office and people are stopping by your office and the water cooler talk, right? All these different things. So, for me, if I thought what would work for me, I think, some sort of a hybrid solution, which is what I see most companies going to. There's a lot more flexibility offered, and everyone they are in different situations, right? Some have families and kids are taking care of elderly parents, and they really would like to go to the office, whereas some others, they feel very comfortable staying at home. So I'm just wondering, do we feel that the companies will react in that way, where this flexibility will be tailored to the individual? Going back kind of to what Tom said, really kind of connecting with people on the individual level, understanding what works for them and adapting, and kind of just saying, hey, everyone back in the office because I feel that's how people connect better. I don't think that's the right answer. Or we're not going back at all, is also not the right answer. So I guess any reactions to that?
I'd love for Tom to weigh in on that. I think you guys have made a huge decision on a very large scale, and the dynamics around that would be awesome to hear.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. We certainly thought long and hard about, well, what is the way to evolve out of everyone at our firm working from home for the last 18 months, and also understanding the rapid changing face of business, the demands on growth, and the talent war that was out there. We ultimately decided to be the first movers around formally recognizing a virtual role, a virtual worker at PwC, as a choice that workers could make. And we were the first in large professional services firms to do that. It certainly was a bold move on our part, but we have found early on the returns have been very, very great. We actually found that there were elements of our population that were thinking about resigning after being at home for 18 months and realizing that they had other parts of their life that they had to balance and did not want to have to go on the road, virtually 5 days a week. So those folks we ultimately saved. Immediately after announcing the virtual role, our applications to our firm increased 20% from what our normal rate was, and that happened almost instantaneously. And obviously, given the growth initiatives that we have, was very, very well received. I think the important part around all this, though, is it really is a balancing act. We couldn't afford to have our entire population go virtual. There are some roles as we run our offices that are required to be in the office every day. There are other roles that I'll call hybrid or flex that need to be at clients sometimes, other times can do their roles virtually. And now we have an element of our population that will do their roles virtually, generally speaking, 97, 98% of the time. But from time to time, there will be reasons for them to come to the office or meet with a team in person somewhere. But it truly is, our formal play around talent and be a more flexible organization and ultimately recognize that in order to attract the best talent, the most diverse talent, we need to have options that fit with some of the needs of the individuals that are out there that possess these skills and capabilities. So whereas in the past, we required people to locate around major centers, now we have people that can work virtually and ultimately a little bit more remotely, if you will, geographically than before. So that's opened up a whole marketplace for us for talent that we could attract that we did not attract before.
And it also, it aligns with, right, now the clients that you serve, if they're open to more of a remote workforce, at least I've seen at Siegfried, it opens up the talent pool now nationally instead of locally. So you're able to get a much better fit in terms of serving your client. And you're more likely to, ultimately win and add value in ways that was unexpected. Another thought I had.
Pete, I got to jump in because it's
Sure.
funny. Our company has taken a different approach because we, MSG Entertainment owns Madison Square Garden. We're a venue-based kind of in-person company. Over our thousands of people that actually work in our venues obviously have to be there on a day-to-day basis. And so our view is our management should not be treated any different than our frontline employees. So we acquire people to be here every day. And again, it's going to be interesting over the next few years because I think it is going to have an impact on recruiting, but it's definitely the way we've decided to go. And that's why it's going to be a fascinating real world experiment to see how this works out over the next 5 or 10 years as different firms take different approaches. And we'll see. I don't know. We'll see which the right approach, but hopefully the individual, this is going back to Tom's point, will find what works for them and figure out what's best for them in their lives and how they can get the best career. But it'll definitely be interesting. I think you're going to see different approaches, and they all could work, which would be great. That way, people have choices.
Do you feel that decision resonated with if the other people need to be in the office, and you say, okay, well, we're going to be here to support you. We're all going to be in the office. Do you feel that was well received?
It was very well received by our kind of frontline kind of vendors or ushers, et cetera, because they, there's always us versus them. I mean, we are not demanding people to be here 5 days a week. There's definitely a recognition that people can get more work done. There should be more flexibility. But as I said, we're more like in office kind of fostering kind of in-person connections. So, look, we're not blind to the world. We can't just say, oh, we're going to force you to be here. We're going to take time and go back to billable hours and that kind of stuff. But, we're asking our employees to be here.
Great. Something that Tom mentioned in terms of, at such a broad scale, what PwC has done, I think it's impressive. But within that, you mentioned there are some jobs that just have to be on site, right? And there are other jobs that lend itself to being a little bit more remote. how is PwC reacting where that person that now needs to be in the office that would rather be remote, they could quit, right? But somebody might be remote that would rather be in the office, right? So how are you like surveying, the organization as a whole and saying, maybe we could just have some cross transfers rather than someone feeling like they have to leave, where we can make some adjustments internally and make sure that we align, what's available to the right person?
We're actually sorting through that real time. This topic of going virtual, returning to the office, and ultimately working around these different ways of working, virtual, flex, and in office. We're working through some of those matters as we speak, and in fact, trying to accommodate folks, trying to place them in other roles that if they have a need to work remotely, trying to find roles that would work for them. Likewise, to the degree that we have other roles that need to be done in the office, we're not only looking at traditional talent, but also contract talent, et cetera, to fill some of those needs that might be more reliant on physical location. So.
Thanks, Tom. So that leads me to my next question. Do we feel that we can be better aligning work and individual strengths within teams versus overly focusing on individual weaknesses, right? So more cross-training and truly understanding what work resonates with who best and adjusting accordingly. So just from a personal example, I had everyone across my team fill out what they do in a given week, right? And circle, at the end of the week, circle what you really enjoy doing, right? And this is a great exercise for everyone out there to do with your team, right? And you'd be surprised, and I do this as a leadership advisor with some of the CFOs I work with. If they do this, often it's about 20 to 25% of somebody's role. They're like, I actually really enjoy this. I think this aligns with my unique abilities, and this doesn't feel like work to me. This is something I love. I look forward to doing this. The other 75%, I wish I could do it. But it's important to note that what someone's unique ability is and what they like to do really varies, right? Like personally, I love networking events. I love meeting people. Like that's not work for me. I truly enjoy that. But many in the accounting finance world, they would much rather write a 10-page technical accounting memo than go to a networking event, which is the opposite, right? So how do we align, with people's strengths? I'm just curious to gauge, how do you feel about what I just said, and where do you think, how do you think we could do better?
Yeah, Peter, I'll jump in there. Certainly, I think there's been a lot of research done around, leveraging people's strengths. I also think the business world is really demanding that you leverage people's strengths in order to be successful. Given the talent war that's out there, if folks can't ultimately leverage their strengths in the organization they're working with today, it's very easy for them to find an opportunity outside where they can leverage their strengths. But I think the business is demanding that people really specialize, but that teams become multidisciplined. I mean, we see it in finance, we see it in HR, we see it in our sales and marketing functions. You can have the traditional skills and capabilities, but in this day and age of digitalization, we're certainly adding data and analytics specialists to each one of these functions. We're adding project managers, people that have backgrounds in Agile, so that they can run priority projects for us. So I think you're seeing multidisciplined teams that are very, very special, have very specialized skills amongst them, similar to a sports team, just to draw an analogy, right? A lineman probably wouldn't be a great receiver, but if you get all the right skills and capabilities in the right positions, you can really have a high-performing team. I think another example at PwC where we've demonstrated this is as we look to upskill around digitalization, we had a massive task at hand in the United States, let alone globally. Over 55,000 people that we needed to upskill, and we had a real challenge in order to accelerate that upskilling. We were met with, how are we going to digitally upskill everyone? So we ultimately stratified our population. We had a foundational level of digital upskilling that brought about awareness and education around digital, what it is, and what the true opportunities are out there around digital. And we required every employee to really go through that digital upskilling curriculum. But in addition to that, we tapped some folks, and actually they volunteered. We had folks volunteer across the organization to become digital accelerators. And these are folks that had a deep passion around technology, around digital acumen. And ultimately, we gave them opportunities to grow and develop in areas of data and analytics, of RPA and IPA. And ultimately, we found these folks, they really ran with it. They became experts in these areas. And ultimately, they weren't taken out of their day-to-day roles. We provided some capacity for them to get this upskilling and ultimately bring those skills back to the team. So rather than requiring every team member to become a digital expert, we built that foundational level, but then put some highly specialized, highly trained and badged and credentialed folks in our teams that could help us automate, that could help us with data visualizations, that could help us with RPA. And it's a very fresh example and relevant example how we've been able to focus on specialization and run with your strengths to bring that alive and ultimately have impact to the business.
Hey, Tom, I'd like to jump. Oh,
Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Well, I'd just like to jump in on two things. One, just to react to Pete's comment about networking. That's pretty much my living hell, so I would not want to go networking. But it actually connects to my next comment in terms of people always say you should focus on your strengths, and I actually tell people don't. I think if you really want to be a real leader, you know, when I kind of worked my way up through the CFO, I was head of M&A at AOL. And then when I took the next job, they said, look, don't focus on M&A, focus on accounting. Focus on things you're not strong on, because you got to build a full set of skills. So, you know, I talk to accountants, they're great technical accountants. I'm like, well, if you want to be the principal accounting officer, you need to do operational accounting. You need to do SEC reporting. So it's great to focus on the strengths, but then you're committing to being an expert in that area. So it depends on where you want to get at the end. But I always tell people, look, it's always easy to go what you're good at, but try to kind of tackle what you're not good at, which has required me over the years to try to become better at networking and actually put myself out there and actually interact with people. But, you know, it's to me, the key is you want to have a full set of skills. If you want to be the CFO, the principal accounting officer, CEO, they're probably not going to hire you if you're just good at one thing. So Sarah, I'll turn it over to you.
No, I think that's good. I think I was kind of down a different direction, so I think that was great. I was going to build a bit off of Tom's point around, this concept that the need for all of these various skills inside of firms is really something that's, I think, relatively new. And I'll be a bit provocative in that I think that there's a big gap between the university system and corporate America, and maybe that means it's a great opportunity, and maybe that means there's a focus on the way we recruit. But, I don't know that you go in as a data science major at 18 and think about that you might be creating a potential career in an accounting firm, right? Or alternatively, you go in as an engineer and you think that you might have a role in media. And so I think that there's a totally different direction on this, I think, Mark, than what you were taking. But I think on Tom's point around the way that modern companies, I think, are focusing on the strengths of individuals is bringing in very specific skill sets that are necessary to, really create and compete with an innovative workforce. And that innovative workforce has a combination of people that you probably wouldn't see in an accounting firm, for example, 10 years ago, that now is necessary to be competitive. And so I think it really creates an amazing opportunity for us to attract really diverse talent that complements what I would say traditional accounting tracks or tax tracks or other finance tracks. I work in a data science firm, and it's impossible for me to be effective CFO if my finance team can't combine two files. When we, as a business, we have people who deal with copious amounts of data and do incredible and interesting things with it, right? So I have to be competitive with that kind of talent set inside of my finance organization, even if they have zero accounting, tax, or finance background. So maybe not a real point, but I just think it really is interesting that to build a strong finance team now, you've got to look outside of what I would say is traditional finance tracks and accounting tracks inside of universities, or otherwise you're going to really not be able to, I think, be competitive or really relevant inside the organization.
Thank you, Sarah. Mark. Sarah, is that what you meant? You have a quote in the FEET Collective that says, we have a chance to accelerate the development of the most innovative and diverse workforce. I mean, does that tie into your quote there?
Yeah. I think, maybe it's a part of it, which is this combination of breaking down kind of the barriers. There's lots of gaps, right? And I think that companies have spent millions over the last decade attempting to close maybe gender and racial divides, but in the process, we are often blind to the other divides, like geography and, maybe this more evasive and elusive division between entrepreneurship or technical data engineering and corporate career paths. And I think that, really my quote there is the fact that, I think in the year before COVID, the Fortune 500 spent $8.6 billion on trying to solve some of these gaps with things like training and hiring and mentoring. And, 20%, I think, of the last BCG study was that was effective because what people needed was childcare, remote work, and access to external networks. And so, what I think COVID has done is broken down this barrier of thinking we knew what it took to maintain and drive a diverse workplace inside of our organization, and force us to, what Tom mentioned earlier, an entirely different data set, which is, what about all the people who have already left? There was this, the FEET was super focused on this $1.7 trillion of all of primarily women, but other folks who had left the workforce, that if you really want to change the trajectory of senior leadership and create this innovative workforce, you've got to go be able to access them. And they need geography, the geography constraints, but also, you've created a borderless environment where, no longer do you have to go live in a Sprinter van in San Francisco to get a data science job. We can access someone in Nashville who wants to be near an elderly parent. We don't have to necessarily move a man or a woman to Dallas to take on a senior leadership position or send someone on a plane for a 1-hour meeting. So I think that the operating issues that often drove people out of the workforce or potentially created a more limited pool from where we sought our leaders have really been broken down if we're willing to embrace the good out of it. And for that, I really think that there's a lot of opportunity to really achieve what we've been trying to achieve purely because of the operational obstacles that we've brought down. And I think that's really what I meant more by this opportunity that we have today to create innovative workforce is really, related to those gaps that I think now have the capability of being closed.
Thank you, Sarah. Any reactions?
From my standpoint, I mean, I agree totally with Sarah in that I think it's, these new ways of working have just opened up our access to talent. It's, really not borders around that, less barriers around accessing really highly capable, skilled folks. And it's kind of a new world to operate in. Maybe some organizations operated that way prior to COVID, but I think COVID has really opened up our minds in a way that we're able to access skilled talent more readily now as a result of having a virtual element as well as other ways of working too. It's not solely virtual, but we certainly have flex and in-office as well. So.
I appreciate that. So we have about 5 minutes or so left. So I just wanted to prompt the audience for questions. We do have a few that have come in. And just a reaction, Tom, to what you said earlier, the digital agility training. Siegfried, I know, was one of your first clients, and it's been an impactful program. And then Mark, I can appreciate your points on, getting out of your comfort zone and getting a varied amount of experience. I think, otherwise you just become an expert in one thing. I would say focusing, I think all those areas are probably fall into your unique ability, right? And even though you're focusing on what you're passionate about, you can still do that and get out of your comfort zone. So I think your point is very relevant. And what I was saying, like somewhere in between in terms of progressing your career is important for, at all stages of your career to approach it that way. So one of the questions that came in from the audience is, does the remote work environment allow organizations to seek talent globally rather than focused on local geographic markets? If so, wouldn't leadership require a more open-mindedness to this approach and different cultural motivators?
I can take that, since we operate a global organization and we ultimately do try to bring the very best talent to bear, experts in the field, regardless of where they are. I think there are other regulatory and compliance matters that have to be sorted through if you're going to deliver outside the U.S. borders, and that professional services, there are tax laws and regulations that you have to comply with. But the concept certainly can be applied, and certainly I know we have centers of expertise around the globe that we draw on in order to deliver our services. And these members these folks in these centers are considered part of our extended team that's based out of the U.S. So certainly we're looking at it very open-minded way, and another talent play in order to find very highly skilled talent, particularly in the IT marketplace, but in other areas as well. And we have, we leverage our network across the globe in order to deliver across borders, if you will.
You're right. You were in the best position to answer that question. So just a comment that came in from someone in the audience. I love the thought of flexibility these days. I went part-time to raise 4 children and then came back with remote option for the last 8 years to care for my elderly father. And I feel I had always been discounted as dedicated, questioned if dedicated. The last year has opened everyone's eyes to how people can actually be productive and huge contributors in a remote situation. I congratulate you all for flexing to the advantages of both arrangements. So I thought that was a relevant comment. Just a quick last question. We have about 2 minutes left, but I'm just curious, at this stage of your career, do you continue to leverage mentors? Do you continue to mentor others? And what is your thought around mentorship throughout your career?
It's Mark. I'll start. I continue to leverage my mentors. I got a few of them. I talked to one last week, and hopefully I can become a mentor to somebody who can come to me and really wants my advice, but we'll see.
Do you think you learn more being mentored or mentoring?
I learn now more mentoring to understand kind of what people are doing. And it goes back to what Tom said and Sarah said. It's about really talking to individuals, understanding what they want, and helping understand what everybody needs. So I learn much more now about when I mentor.
I think that there's a contemporary approach now to mentoring that I love seeing. One is that, it's not a forced trend. It's not a transactional thing. I mentor when I see a seed that I want to water, and not because, it's a very awkward thing when someone walks up and says, do you want to be my mentor? I mean, it's like a bad date, right? So I think that, I think we've got to take that contemporary approach. I think what I've learned is that I've gone away from the fact that my mentors are people who are more senior than me, who have a role that I want to aspire to, that sit in the seat that I want, and rather realizing that, mentorship is about having a buffet of mentors around you. And sometimes those are people outside of your organization that have nothing to do with your profession, and they can give you a perspective. Sometimes they're people younger and more junior than you. Sometimes they're people who have been in your organization for 20 years and know where all the bones are buried and can give you perspective that maybe someone else who's trying to achieve something else won't. And I think that this opening up of it doesn't necessarily need to be someone that, you know, is going to determine your next move that is your mentor. I think is something that I learned later in my life than, you know, maybe compared to what I thought a mentor was when I was first starting my career. And that's proved to be very valuable in finding my way in the last few years.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, we are just at the hour point. I personally think mentorship is, you know, both ways. You learn as much, you know, mentoring others as much as you do from your mentors. And I think it's important to get mentors from different industries, right? Different backgrounds, not just solely, you know, within your career track. Could just yield its own benefits. Tom, Sarah, Mark, I'm so grateful for the time that you spent to prep for this panel. Amazing, just accomplished careers. I look forward to seeing what you all are doing next. Thank you so much to our audience and those that are participating with questions, and FEI for putting on such a fantastic event. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Tom and Mark.
Great. Thank you so much, Peter, Sarah, Mark, and Tom, for sharing your insights. This concludes the session. Our next session will begin at 11:15 a.m. Eastern. Please look for the pop-up window in the upper right-hand corner to bring you back to the CFRI Conference Hub for your next session. We look forward to your participation. And again, thank you to our panelists.